Hey everyone. Uh, in case you're in the wrong class, hopefully you're not. This is Criminal Justice 1340 Investigations. I'm Professor Swanson. This is my buddy Odie. So what we're going to do is I typically at SUU I teach face to face, but they asked me to do this online class, and hey, I'm game. Understand for those of you that are capable and able that as we get to certain topics within this course, a lot of this course is designed with lab work, actually going in there doing fingerprinting, blood spatter, ballistics. So those types of labs that we're not able to do online, when the fall semester starts, if you're here on campus, and as I'm teaching this face-to-face class, which I will be, you're more than welcome. Just stay in touch with me online, and I'll let you know when we have that lab, so you can kind of come in and have a hands-on and actually experience what we are going to talk about online. So this course, let me introduce myself. I get ahead of myself. A lot of you know me. For those of you that don't, I was born and raised in Vegas, as you can see, Vegas Golden Knights. And then I went on to do my career with the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, where I did over 20 years there doing all kinds of different assignments. I love the department. I love the career that I chose. But at the same time, I've always liked academics and education. I think that's critically important to understand as a pracademic, meaning I've spent over 20 years as a detective and as a cop. But I loved going and learning. I went to UNLV and probably spent 20 years there going to school, just learning. In fact, I still do. So I enjoy the academic part of that. So the class that you're going to get from me is going to be kind of a mixture. Clearly, there's going to be an academic component to it. There's going to be a lot of hands-on practical experience. Throughout the course, I'll probably give you a lot of stories. I love telling stories about things that happened during my career in Las Vegas, and we'll get to those. But a few things that I need you to understand, and I know it always comes out, and when I see other professors in criminal justice, when they teach, understand, especially if you're an international student, that in the United States, we have this very complicated federalism where we have state and local law enforcement agencies, which if you didn't know, we have close to 18,000 police agencies, most of which are under 100 officers. So in the United States, we have a lot of police departments that are very small. The one I'm from is big, rather large department, probably in the top 10 in the country. But most police agencies are going to be small, very few detectives within those small departments. So a lot of detective work in the United States is done by police officers. Those in uniform that show up on calls will then follow up with investigations. So don't assume, and we'll get to that, a lot of myth that you see on TV, that all police and detective work is done by separate individuals. A lot of times in the United States, it might be just the same patrolman that shows up that night that is going to follow that case through the district attorney and on into the courts. And having said that, remember, I'm going to do the best I can to say this is kind of normal what police agencies do throughout the country, but every agency is going to do things a little bit different. So if you're sitting back home and you're watching this video and you say, well, Swanson, I'm starting to feel a little bit like, it's not consistent. And the things that I'm used to in Las Vegas, they might not do in Cedar City. They might not do in Utah. They might not do wherever you're from. But I'll give you a general idea that this is typically what happens. And it even gets more complicated when you bring in the federal government in the United States. We have a lot of federal agencies that do police work, investigative work, the Department of Justice, and a lot of different agencies that do investigative work. So as we start to proceed down this path and we talk about investigations, in your first chapter, you're going to have to at least understand, what does that actually mean? Do we pick and choose which crimes that we investigate? Who makes that decision? That will be one of your first discussions that I want you to write about. We're clearly in a political age. I think we can all agree that at this point, we have a lot of different viewpoints in the country, and there's a lot of different courts looking into a lot of different things on both sides of the aisle. They're going to say, well, courts are being used politically for this or for that, whichever side. So at the end of the day, when we talk about investigations of criminal nature, remember, investigations that we're going to be talking about in this class are criminal. Criminal codes and statutes were designed by our Constitution to be the state. The state decides how to regulate the behavior of the individuals within that border. So clearly we're going to have a lot of different behavior and criminal statutes in a lot of different states that differ. So we're going to have to at least talk about that. You know, just because it's against the law in Utah, in Nevada, where I'm from, it's not against the law. Drinking behaviors. It's expected in Las Vegas to drink a lot. You don't drink a lot here in Utah, so the states will decide. But who in each of these states is going to decide at what point do we follow it up with an investigation, move on to find a suspect, and then ultimately take them to court to answer to what they have done, and ultimately a punishment. That's a whole nother class, which by the way I teach in an upper division class. Punishment and just what we decide to do and investigate is just a fascinating topic. What you were sitting at home and thinking about that you don't want people to do, other states they're okay with. So there's so much flexibility when we talk about this course, but we're going to go over a lot of different things. I first want you to at least understand who I am, where I'm coming from. Understand it's really not that complicated. At the end of the day, no matter what you see on TV, I think most people worldwide are good people. They've made a horrible decision on that moment that they decided to violate a law, bad decision, but now they're trying to figure out how to deal with that decision. And most people at the end of the day really do want to correct that problem. Most people want to confess, which you don't see that in TV. TV makes it look like we have to investigate everything when actually we don't. Many things that happen out there, the person that we know is the suspect, work with the police, work with the detectives to try and resolve how are we going to move forward to make the victim whole again and try and make it better. So really, you know, and we'll go over things that if this is your career, many of you that are taking this class, some of you want to get into investigative work of some type, work for some police agency. Many of you just you're English majors and you want to write stories about crime novels. I get many students that just want to know, what do we do? Why do we do it? How do we do it? So when you write your story, so I know I've got a lot of different students out there. Don't be bashful. When you get online, when I open up the course, you'll see I have contact information. If there's something that's really you're curious about, send me that question and I'll answer it in one of the next videos the best I can. We'll move forward with that, and clearly the textbook that I'm having you read, pretty generic. What I mean by that is there's a lot of good information in there. Some of the information I might not agree with, that my department in Vegas, maybe we didn't do it quite that way. Other departments might. But for a book and something to especially if you're an international student, it's something you can follow along with, have an understanding of this is how we do it in the United States. So we'll do that. Hopefully when we get to that point where you're confused, really a lot of it's the federalism. Just the whole understanding that we have a lot of different police agencies, a lot of different investigative bodies, and everybody might do it a little bit different. But the police officer and the detective, not much difference. They do the same job. They're trying to help somebody resolve probably one of the worst days of that person's life. And we try to get there without taking it personal and move forward. Having said that, just think about the course itself. As you look at the modules, when you go online, you'll see that I've designed the course. This online course is 7 weeks. So I'm going to have 7 modules. So each week I'm going to have things I want you to read, things I want you to go online and do, things I want you to have an understanding of. Yes, there's going to be a quiz at the end of each module. You'll take a quiz. We'll have discussion boards. I clearly want you to look at the question that I'm asking you to write about and do the best you can. Go online, try and see both sides of this argument, and then support that argument in a paper that you're going to write on a discussion board. And then I want you to look at everybody else's. You need to look at everybody else's idea and respond to their idea. If you don't like it, be nice. Let's be nice. Tell them why you don't like it. Even better yet, if you can go online and back up your point, something that's big, at least in my mind, after being old and doing everything that I've done, is I look at it in different categories. Why do you believe the way you believe? Is it because that's just what you've been taught? You have very little information other than that you really trust people in your life, mom, dad, people within your church, just people that you trust. So when they tell you this is the way the world is, that's what you believe, and that's fine. Some of you say, well, it's more than that. I've lived it. I've been in the military. I've lived this. I've been a victim of a crime. And let me stop there. In the course, we're going to be talking about a lot of things, a lot of deviant behavior. The whole reason we're doing an investigation is someone has done something that most people out there don't even want to know about. And it could be very, very sensitive to a lot of my students. At any point during this class, if there's anything that we are doing, discussing, and it is something that is you don't want to even think about, talk about, it's too close to home, because, I mean, I'll be honest, shit's going to get real. It is. We're going to talk about people that have hurt people, and if that's too close to home, just send me an email. Say, hey, I had something happen in my life. Can I just avoid this? And I'm flexible. We'll have you do something else. Because the things we are going to be discussing and how we deal with them can be very, very difficult for many people to talk about. So anyway, start to think after you read chapter 1. What's an investigation? Why do we even investigate? Why do we even punish? I mean, I want you to be thinking, why do we punish? Do we punish because it makes us feel good? To make you hurt because you made somebody else hurt? Do we punish because we're trying to stop a future person from doing that event? So be thinking. A lot of you might have had my 10-10 intro class, and you'll have a heads up on some of these ideas. But if you've never thought about it, I want you to be thinking about, okay, I understand we have to investigate, but then what do we do? Who has the power in this investigation? Is it the detective? Who actually decides how we punish? Those kinds of things. So as we move forward, what I want to try and do in this course is, number one, I want you to understand that if you're going to be good at this, you don't have to really have some superpower. Communication skills. If you can just talk to people, you will be good at being a detective. You will be good at being an investigator. Look at those tedious things that other people might overlook, but communication skills. If this is what you want to do, I need you to, one, understand you're there with victims, communicate with those victims, understand the pain that they're going through, try and be there to support them. But at the same time, like I said earlier, the suspect, the person that did this, you need to communicate with that person. I'm not saying you have to be their friend. You might not like what they did to this person. You might hate what they did. But if you're not able to communicate to that person and get them to understand that we're trying to resolve this, lots of cases can end to be solved by just the communication skills between the detective and the suspect. And then finally, clearly there's going to be many, many people in the community that if you stand back and you don't enlist their help, you're going to not be able to solve a lot of cases. You need to communicate with the community, with the people that you are there to help through all of these things that happen to them. So you've got to be able to communicate to people outside of the suspect and the victim, talking to people whether they might be someone that maybe doesn't always do the right thing, but they might have knowledge, whether we call that an informant or just a business in that community that might know something about something that happened. If you're a good cop and a good detective and you're out there talking to people in the community, you're going to have such an advantage when you have things happen that you might not have a lot of evidence with. And we're going to talk about how do we gather evidence. There's a multitude of things that we do. And as technology increases, we're going to continue to be able to progress with these cases and put people in jail, make them pay for the crimes that they've committed. So we need to understand, one, the criminal justice system, the actors within that system, that the courts certainly have a role to play. The courts are not my field. After I do an investigation, law enforcement is one part of the criminal justice field. When we do the investigation and we decide someone has violated a statutory law, we then move that case, give that case to the courts. It's now the courts' We were never intended, the Constitution was never intended for a detective or an investigator to punish anyone. The courts do their job, and then the correctional system, whether it's parole, probation, prison, all the enormous things that we do in the United States to punish, not the role of the investigator. Our job is to do two things. Did somebody violate a statute? Did you do something in the state, in the place that I live, that our state does not want you to do? And if you did do that, then we are then going to have to put a case together to prove that you in fact did it and that you understood that what you did was wrong. That's key to the Constitution. We'll get into some of those. We're certainly going to address in this course many amendments, the Bill of Rights, things that affect the way investigators and police do their job. We need to understand two things moving forward. As an investigator, we have to try and figure out how to balance those individual liberties that the Constitution demands. In the United States, we have a Constitution, and that Constitution says we treat people this way, meaning law enforcement, the government. So we have to understand that we need to balance, we treat people the right way while we're trying to protect people and control for that crime. It's not an easy thing to do. Understand that. It's very easy to go out and put everybody in jail, put everybody in prison. But doing it to protect them based on the way we believe, our Constitution, we have to be very, very careful. And all of you know, I'm not going to sit here and say that we haven't made many mistakes over the years. Law enforcement, many times, investigators, detectives, have been on the wrong side of what we think is right. I get that. And we'll discuss those times we did make mistakes. Some of the mistakes, certainly corruption. Many of the mistakes were we just didn't know. We did things in a way that we didn't realize we were victimizing people more. And we'll address those as we get to them. So understand that's kind of the overview of the course. We're going to get into major crimes throughout the course. We're certainly going to talk about dead body investigations, death, homicide. We're going to talk about crimes against people. If I start to get a lot of emails from you guys and you want to specifically talk about a certain type of crime, I know last semester human trafficking was big. Everybody wanted to say, okay, human trafficking, there's a movie about it. How big is it? What do we do? Are we doing nothing? If that's of interest, send me. Hey, I'd love to know how the majority of investigations are put together, and we'll do that. The problem with a course like this is it's an introductory course, and there are many crimes that people commit. In fact, for those that work in the field, we typically put them into about 8 to 10 different categories, from property crimes to crimes against people to just vice crimes. When I use the term vice crimes, it's things that, it's kind of fascinating, but we try to protect you from you. Narcotics. You're not really victimizing somebody, but many states don't want you to be taking that drug because you're going to hurt yourself. So we'll talk about how do we investigate vice crimes and things of that nature. But let's go into a few things about the course that you might have a question about. Number one, the textbook. I understand the textbook is not the cheapest book in the world. If you're struggling and you don't, that's too much money, you'll be able to get through this course without the book. If you watch my videos and if you send me a lot of communication, say, hey, what about this? I will try and cover the majority of everything on a quiz. So if it's really an issue and can I get by without the book? Yeah, you can. A lot of you, and I get it, many of you learn in different ways. Some need to read because absolutely, I'm ADHD. If you didn't notice, I talk fast. I talk a lot. For international students, and I have a lot of international students watching this, if you're just confused, the book will help you through that. Some of the book, some of the chapters, a couple of chapters I might not talk a lot about, simply because technology is moving so quick. We can't keep up with the technology in textbooks. So as you're reading this book, you're going to see things about photographing crime scenes, the type of cameras, video like I'm doing today. A lot of this stuff might already be old technology. So I'll kind of avoid the overall technology and how we do it in crime scenes. We'll talk about crime scenes, how we document, and how we protect that information for court. But in the book, I'll kind of gloss over it. But throughout the class, I want you to do a few things. Number one, I want you to understand that what you watch on TV sometimes is completely far from the truth. So when we use the terms like criminalistics and forensics, they're completely different. Unlike in TV, if this is your dream job and you want to be a scientist and you want to actually do blood spatter, you want to do ballistics, you want to do DNA, those are scientists. Get your degree in science. You know, I have to tell students every day, we need scientists in criminal justice. But a degree in criminal justice doesn't help me. If you want to help me in a case and DNA is your thing, then get degrees in that specific science field. So when we talk about forensics, a forensics person that helps me in a criminal case is a scientist. When I use the term criminalistics or the TV show CSI, crime scene investigator, that's not a scientist. They're just somebody that their job is to help me, the detective, understand what we're looking at. They're very good at going into a crime scene, criminalistic CSI people, grabbing the evidence from that crime scene, and they're good at helping me put the story together. But in criminalistics and forensic science, neither one of these two people that assist me ever have contact with the suspect. So understand, if you want to get involved in criminalistics and forensics, you really don't get involved with any interview and interrogations. You don't arrest. You don't have anything to do with the suspect. If that's what you really want to do, you want to join the FBI and you want to arrest people, contact people, interview, interrogate, then that is something totally different from criminalistics and forensics. Couple of key dates. My job, and it was way before me, even though I look very old, certainly I want you to understand a couple of dates. The FBI, which is in the United States for my international students, the FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigation, and really the Department of Justice are really the top police officers in the country, in the United States. So as we have 18,000 police agencies doing police work, if we need help, we lean on the federal government, the FBI, DOJ. And in 1967, it really helped us do our job when we created NCIC. It's the National Crime Information Center. It was at that moment that we were able to put all of our crime scene information into the computer, whether it was a gun used in a crime, a car, anything, DNA. It was a way to take everything and put it into a central system, and every one of the agencies in the country, worldwide actually, can now lean on that and look and see, I found a gun here in Vegas. Where's that gun from? I can get online and see it was used in New York 20 years ago. So it really helped us. So understand when I give a lecture and I'm talking about NCIC, it's a national crime database that collects an enormous amount of information. The second thing is, and a lot of students gravitate here, and we'll talk about it briefly, is 1970 when the FBI created the Criminal Profiling Unit. Absolutely needed. I think most of us in this field have relied heavily on the FBI and the criminal profilers. When we really have nothing to go on, they come and help us say, this is the type of person that you're probably going to be looking for. So it's an enormous amount of help. Clearly, if that's something you want to do, that's a whole nother degree path. We are looking for people that are very good, psychology. Most of the time it's masters, if not PhDs in that. The FBI has a just wonderful criminal profiling unit. So understand that. And then really the last date that I really am only going to touch on was in New York City. Certainly New York City and NYPD, largest police department on the planet. They have more officers than anybody anywhere. They've come up with some really amazing ideas and ways to investigate and do things. And one of those things was in 1994, the whole idea of CompStat. It was the idea, and we still do it today, using computer statistics to help solve crimes, whether we're looking for the suspect or whether we're trying to figure out why is this happening. Computer statistics. It was that moment in time where police agencies said, we don't want you to just drive around as a detective with nothing to go on. We want you to look for the problems that are actually occurring in your area, in your town, in your city. What is actually happening to the people here? Is it crimes against people? Is it sexual assaults? Is it homicide? Is it auto theft? So tell me what's actually happening. And then I want you to look online and look at all these agencies, computer statistics, and find things that other agencies have used to go after the problem. So computer statistics, CompStat, was at that moment where we're not just driving around with nothing to do, and we're not just trying to guess on how to solve these cases. It was an amazing time when we switched to this idea, let's do it the right way, the smart way, rather than just running around. We're going to get heavily into evidence because clearly we're going to be talking about evidence throughout this class. And in chapter 1, we'll talk about it in great detail. So we'll get into that, but before we do, I want you to have an understanding of what we call Locard's principle of exchange. Locard. It's the idea that anytime two things come into contact with one another, they're going to leave behind some trace evidence, always. So when two things come into contact with one another, we teach detectives, we teach investigators, police officers, any public responders, whether they're fire departments, whether they're emergency medical technicians, to understand when you come into my crime scene, the minute you walk into my crime scene, you're going to change that crime scene. Your DNA, your presence, the minute you walked in, changes it. So we must be very, very careful anytime to protect that crime scene. Because I still worry sometimes about things that happen. Our biggest fear is that we put the wrong person in jail and they've been punished and they didn't do the crime. We know we've made those mistakes. A lot of those mistakes happen simply because of Locard's principle of exchange. Evidence was in the crime scene that shouldn't have been there, but it was. So always keep in mind, protect that crime scene. Be very, very careful. And also, don't get caught up in just because you're looking at something, and even though your brain's saying, every time I saw this in the past, this is what occurred. It might not. Sometimes what you think is happening, that might not be the case. So we have to ask ourselves, what I'm looking at and what I think has happened, is that actually accurate? So be very, very careful. Don't get caught up, and we'll talk about this more in chapter 2, but it's the whole idea of inductive and deductive reasoning. For those of you that love Sherlock Holmes was an inductive reasoner. Sherlock Holmes, for those of you that don't know, he was a very famous detective, and he would solve crimes, but he solved them in a certain way. He would walk into a crime scene, and he would look at all the evidence. He'd look at evidence, all the evidence in the crime scene. And after he looked at all the evidence, so he looked at this entire amount of evidence, he would then decide based on all that evidence, I think this is what happened. So it was a bottom-down approach to this is what happened. A lot of detectives, a lot of investigators have done the opposite, deductive reasoning. They walk in, and in their mind they say, I'm pretty smart, this is suicide. Because they see something, they call it suicide, and then they go out and try and find all the evidence to prove that they're right. I don't want you to be thinking that way. We're not here to prove that we are right. I want you to look at the evidence and then try and do the best that you can to then predict what you think is happening. So deductive reasoning can get you into trouble. I want you to be inductive reasoners. Inductive reasoning, you can be wrong. You could be investigating a case for months, all the evidence, and you're like, okay, I think it's this, and you could be wrong, and that's fine. At least you took all the evidence in. Let's go back to the drawing board. Let's figure out what it is. Deductive reasoning, many detectives in the United States, because they're trying to prove suicide, overlook evidence, and you have one shot at that crime scene. Remember that. When we're there that night, when whatever happened, we're gathering all of this evidence. We have one time to be there. A month later, when we go, oh wow, we should have done this, too late. So be very, very careful when we talk about that. So goals. What is the goal of an investigator? Certainly we want to solve a crime. We want to try and help people get back to normal. A few things that the book doesn't really, touch on. There were many things that happened in the United States to people that we don't want to happen. But in the United States and many different criminal things you have the right to prosecute. Some things, if you don't want to prosecute, you don't have to. That's your right. So when I say did a crime occur, it doesn't mean that it didn't happen to you, but if you don't want to prosecute, certainly we prosecute if you're killed. You're dead. Because you're dead, you can't say, I don't want to prosecute. We do it anyway. But many things, like domestic violence, same thing. If you, within a domestic violence relationship, we prosecute anyway. We do that to protect people. But if you don't know who the suspect is, nobody you date, nobody you live with, nobody you're married to, and somebody hurts you, in many cases, in many states, you can just say, I would rather not prosecute, and you have that right. It doesn't mean we are not going to gather evidence. We're not going to document. We still document, but we might not proceed into the courts because your desire is not to go to the courts. So there's a lot of different levels of this. So when I say, did a crime occur? It's number one, does the victim want us to pursue this through the court system? Does the victim want us to actually punish somebody? I've been on many, many calls in Las Vegas where people have been in a bar, they're drinking too much, somebody might get their nose broken because they said something they shouldn't have said, and when I'm there, the person just says, look, the guy shouldn't have punched me in the nose and breaking my nose, but I deserved it, I don't want to prosecute, and in many cases, we accept that and we don't prosecute. Very complicated, but we'll get into that. So anyway, our goal really for those that want us to investigate is to put the best case we can together with all the evidence that we can without violating somebody's constitutional rights, and then present that case to the prosecutor, who ultimately is the most powerful person in the criminal justice system, because the prosecutor can decide, do we move forward or not? It's not me, the detective. It's not the judge. So as we move forward, my job is to do the best I can to give them the tools that they need to move forward in court. And then ultimately, yes, it's my job as a detective to try and get the victim whole again. Try and make them feel better about everything, life. And many times I can't. I can't make them whole again. The things that happen to them are beyond what I have power over. But I'm going to do the best I can to help them navigate through everything that we're doing. You have to put it at a human level. We're not just about putting handcuffs on people. This person went through something pretty bad, and I need to help them get through this and try and prevent that from happening to anybody else again. So understand that. But before I start to go out there and teach you all how to be detectives, I want you to have some basic knowledge of just be a good person. You're going to be going to a crime scene. Things happen. I want you to protect the crime scene. Remember Lockhardt's principle. I get it. But when you go on the crime scene, number one, I want you to make sure everyone is okay. It's just basic, simple being human. When you're on the crime scene, not just the victims, even the suspect, whatever you're faced with in that crime scene as an investigator, if I ask you on a test, and sometimes I do, what is your duty when you arrive at that crime scene? Duty number one, help everybody. Get medical there. If the medical people show up and they're contaminating my crime scene, so what? At the end of the day, I want medical to help save lives and protect people. Your duty number one is to provide emergency assistance to anybody that needs it. Then duty number two, secure the crime scene. Get everybody help, secure the crime scene. It's that simple. Then we can come back and play detective and do the things we need to do. But when I show up as a supervisor, I'm going to ask you, the detective, you, the police officer, is everyone okay here? Has everyone been given the opportunity to be looked like by medical and things like that? Help everyone. So when we talk about being solved, a crime being solved, really it's cleared by an arrest. From my perspective, I make an arrest and then I turn it over to the prosecution. At that point, it's cleared. It might not be solved, and I have no control with what a jury, what a judge might do. I did the best I could, giving the best case I can, and it's cleared. Many cases never get to that point simply because we just don't have enough evidence. And I know people hate to hear that. We don't investigate crimes based on how much torture the victim went through. We hate that people are hurt, trust me. But if somebody is hurt in a bad way, but I've got nothing to go on, I could go out there and drive around all of Las Vegas, but I have zero evidence. A lot of times we don't spend a lot of time on that case because of a term called solvability factors. Know that term. You might see it on a test. Solvability factors are things that are there that night in the crime scene, things that occurred, evidence that as a detective I can follow up on. So we follow up on, it's pretty obvious, we follow up on the easiest things to solve and clear. And there are many times we have many cases that we just don't have solvability factors. We have no evidence. This is where the communication skill comes into play. So, understand there's a lot of things beyond the control of the police. And really a lot of that's budget and money. I would love to say that we have a ton of money, infinite amount of money, that I have a detective that will follow up everything that happens to anybody in the United States. We don't have that kind of money. So because we don't have all those detectives, we have to pick and choose. Same thing with crimes that, even though we're pretty sure that guy did it, if we really don't think that we have enough to give to a prosecutor and move forward to a trial and a jury, that it's just not enough, many times we don't proceed to that point. And a lot of victims and a lot of people are really, really upset because they're like, why aren't you doing something? Well, we don't have enough to where I'm going to be confident, and I don't want to put somebody in jail or in prison that didn't do the crime. So we hope for more evidence to where we're confident. Yes, that's the whole idea of probable cause. Remember that. For those of you that came from the 1010 intro class, probable cause is what our Constitution is based on. It's the idea that as police and detectives in the United States, that this probable cause exists when facts and circumstances would warrant a prudent person, normal people, in believing that a crime has been committed and that the accused committed it. We have to show that we believe this person committed this crime. And if we can't do that, we don't proceed with it in the courts. And that's why many cases sit on desks until we get more information. So have an understanding of that. In the United States, detectives, for the most part, are reactive. A lot of people don't like that. There's just not a good way to be proactive. We don't send a detective to your home because we don't know that you're going to be a victim of a crime. So many detectives in this country basically sit there and we have to wait till that someone becomes a victim. I don't like that idea. There's many things in play, and we talk about them in upper division classes. But at this point in time, most detectives are there in a reactive capacity, that they start to do their job once somebody is hurt because they're reactive in nature. In the policing world, some police officers, they do try and be proactive, keeping things from happening. But in the detective world, it's more reactive. Case screening, when I use the term case screening, that's all about solvability factors. If I'm your supervisor and you're a detective for me, I'm going to be looking at you and going, what happened in your area? What crimes? And do you have evidence and things that we can move forward with to try and put the person responsible in front of a courtroom to answer to what they did? If you don't, then I'm going to screen that case and have you work on something else. It's just the nature of any business. Handle what we can handle now. We'll move on to the other stuff later when we have nothing to do. I'm going to say this, and it seems pretty obvious, but we're certainly living through times when we watch on TV, all of us, and we see things that law enforcement, that detectives do, that all of us, sometimes we just step back and go, why? Why'd they do that? I can't answer that. Police corruption and those that are involved in this world that do things, they're no different than a criminal. And I hope all of them end up being punished for what they've done. So as we move forward, remember, I understand that many, many investigative bodies within policing have gotten to the point where a lot of the community just do not trust them. And there's a lot of reasons for that, and we'll touch on some of those. But I think if we just approach this course with the understanding that I expect everyone within this world to just do the simple task of, we have a Constitution. Read it, live by it, and address those individual liberties for everyone you come in contact with, and we wouldn't see the kind of problems that we see on the nightly news. So keep that in mind. We'll talk about things like undercover, stings, certain types of investigative bodies. They're all different depending on where you're from. Typically, they fall into three categories. We have property crimes. We have crimes against the persons or crimes against people, that where humans hurt other humans. And then we have things like the vice things that I talked about, whether those vice things are narcotics, prostitution. We have human trafficking. So it depends on where you're at and how we go about trying to investigate all these different things. Moving forward through the course, as you read the book, just be careful. You don't have to have superpowers, but we all have biases. We all have this idea in our mind of this is fair, this is not fair. Avoid tunnel vision. Avoid trying to convince yourself that you're right, because many times you're not. So try and just be flexible. Try and understand that there are times that your bias, whatever it might be, you might be wrong. Have an open mind when you move forward. There's a probability of error in everything that we do. And when we make a mistake, and we've seen this many times, there are people that never committed a crime, they're going to suffer that consequence. No matter what your viewpoint is, like even to the extent of the death penalty. We've been wrong in the United States. In fact, statistically, for every 9 people that we have proven that they have committed that crime, ultimately leading to their death, we've been wrong one time. So which means, in the United States, we've been wrong, and people have had to pay the ultimate punishment of being executed. So we must proceed very, very carefully, because there's a lot at risk. Every day we're reading about someone that spent 10, 15, 20 years in prison, and they didn't do it. Detectives don't have a crystal ball. We're not magicians. We're doing the best we can. We just got to get better at what we do and try and avoid the mistakes that the detectives in the past have done. If I had to say at this point from my career, and I was going to hire you, I'd put it into 3 categories. If I'm going to hire you and your dream is to be a homicide detective, you want to be a detective investigator at the FBI. In my viewpoint, again, this is not in the textbook. Number 1, I want you to have communication skills. I want you to be able to communicate. If you're not a good communicator, take classes. Go, get better at it. Many people that are not good public speakers give a lot of speeches so they get better at it. You need to be good at communicating. Second thing is you got to pay attention to the small things, because a lot of small things good detectives pick up on where other people might not. So, having an understanding of tedious tasks, knowing that things that are going on, be aware of that. And then I think most importantly is just being a good person. I call it culturally adroit. If I'm going to have you work in my violent crimes against people, I want you to have an understanding of every culture. Every culture. I'm not asking you to give me a political statement on anybody. But when you walk into someone's home, if it's not the way you believe, it's not your religion, it's not whatever you are, I want you to treat those people with respect. They're going through one of the worst moments of their life. I need you to understand who they are at some level and respect the culture from where they are from to help them navigate that water. So I need you to be culturally adroit, hide your emotions. I would never hire you, to be quite honest, if I thought you were going to decide as a detective which cases you're going to work on and try and solve simply on a bias. I don't like that person, so I'm not going to work and help them out. I don't want you in my unit. You help everyone. That's not what we do. That's not what the Constitution really demands from us. So keep that in mind as we move forward. As we move forward in the United States, remember, we put crimes into categories. In the United States, we put it typically in 2 categories. A felony means you've done something bad. You've done something bad where we need to address it and punish it, punish what you did. And typically what that means is you go to a state prison for a year or more. So if it's a felony, you typically are faced with a punishment that you could be a year or more in a state prison. The minor crimes, misdemeanors, Typically that means whatever you did, which we didn't want you to do, whether it's speeding or this or that, you can be punished. You might go to a jail in Cedar City. You might go to a jail here or there, but you don't go to prison. So without actually getting too deep into this idea, just remember a misdemeanor will put you in a county jail, and we have thousands of them. If you do a felony, you go to a state prison, again, thousands of those. But as we go forward deciding what to happen, we look at specific things like MO, modus operandi. We look for things that we believe a suspect does in that crime. But let me finish this first intro lecture with this idea in mind. I want you to abide by the Constitution. I want you to understand everybody out there, and I hope everybody that ever gets into this career field helps everyone, regardless of what your internal feelings are on anything. But at the same time, I want you all to be able to do your job without getting into trouble, without doing mistakes where it could not only put you in jail as an investigator, detective, police officer, but also sued. You can be sued. You can lose everything you owned. So I always like to end my lecture with a few things to keep in mind. And I always say it's a way to avoid getting into trouble and avoid getting sued. You have a lot of power. You're a detective. You get to take somebody's freedom if you believe they've done something wrong. That's a big power. So because of that, number one, I don't want you to work for a department. There's lots of police departments out there, 18,000. Work for departments that have clear policies and procedures, that you're not guessing every day when you're out there investigating crimes. You're not guessing, what do I do? Your department is such that you have clear policies and procedures helping you do your job. So at the end of the day, if someone says, why did you do it? I did it because my department, NYPD, Chicago PD, Las Vegas PD, this is what they told me to do. Clear policies and procedures. The next one is continuous training. Clearly, as an academic, I spent my entire life in UNLV learning and training every day, even after I was given the badge. It's so critical that you continue to educate yourself on how to do your job better. Number one, understand what the legislature has done. What new laws have they passed? What things are you allowed to do? What things are you not allowed to do? So you need to continually train yourself. You don't just become a cop and a detective and then go, okay, I'm done. That doesn't work that way. So you need to go to a place that you're continually training. And then the next thing is, you need to have proper supervision. In law enforcement, crime scenes, many times you're going to be faced with things that, to be quite honest, there were many times I'm like, wow, I don't know what to do here. I need help. I need other police officers. I need other detectives. I need sergeants. I need lieutenants. I need more than what I'm capable of handling right now. So I need a department that's able to give me that supervision, that help when it's needed. And then the last thing, and I'll leave it there, is I certainly don't like the fact that I have to say this, but when we were given this power to arrest people, I need you to be truthful. I need your reports. I need everything you do to be accurate. Do not put your integrity, do not put yourself in liability's ways. Yes, people hurt people. And there are many times you would love nothing more than this person to suffer the consequences. But don't make up things. Don't make up evidence. Don't do things that put your livelihood, your integrity, your family, everything that you believe in for doing this because you make things up. I want accurate information. At the end of the day, if you look at a victim and say, look, I'm sorry, I don't have enough to prosecute, but I'm not going to make things up. Please, when you document, and you'll document many crime scenes, document what you see and what you observe. Make sure it's accurate. Never, ever in your career, put yourself on the stand in front of a courtroom at a trial and lie. I don't accept that from anybody. I'm just as eager to go after any police officer, any detective that has broken the vows that they made to the Constitution and crossed that line. They're nothing more than a criminal themselves. So again, accurate documentation. As we end, if you have questions, send me an email. As you proceed looking at the syllabus, when I publish it next week, because I'm doing this a couple of days before, Look at the syllabus. If you have questions, get a hold of me. Pull up Module 1, which is week 1, and it'll give you an idea. This is what's expected through the week. We start the course on Monday. Every module starts on Monday. There's going to be assignments that I want you to have done by Wednesday. Some of the assignments you might have till Friday, but we try and get everything done in Module 1 in week 1. Not a lot of makeup work. We then move on to week 2, Module 2. If you have questions, get a hold of me. See you next time.